بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. طيب, so just a quick summary then of last lesson. If you wouldn't mind, we looked at two broad topics. One was Ru'yatullah, the beatific vision. So if somebody was to come up to you and he says that, oh, do you believe that people would see Allah in the hereafter, then what kind of response do you think that you would give? Like, what would you say? What would you say? Quick, let me check my notes. Check my notes. Yeah? What do you think? Anybody from here? What would you say? Sorry? Yeah. You can. Of course, that's the short answer, but يعني إلى ربها ناظرة. نعم صح. Yeah, but he wants to know, yeah, okay, it's a verse in the Quran, but how can you see Allah Azza wa Jal? Like, how are you going to see Allah? Like, does he, like, is he in a place that you can see him? Is he in front of you?
We don't know how manifestation.
Yeah, this is true, but there's an answer. There's an answer that I gave you.
So
Yeah.
it's not idrak, knowing like the whole thing of Allah.
Uh-huh.
So in terms of seeing, you know it. So you really know a part of Allah in that sense.
Okay, yeah. Like the idea was, the bit that was very good there was that we don't consider the word ar-ru'ya to mean idrak. Because idrak in Arabic means to encompass something. And we don't believe that happens. There's no ihata of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ar-ru'ya is a ma'na a'am. It's a broader meaning than idrak. Okay, and it's a naw'un min al-ilm. It's a type of knowledge. Yes. But the idea is that you behold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not restricted to an ala, to a tool. And it does not mean that you encompass Allah as if He's in a space or time. But before we went into that, we said that how you want to start an answer like this is by first, or forget the answer. I was just giving it to you like that to see, Jazakallah khair, to see how much you remember of it. But firstly it's about you thinking, is it even possible to see Allah? That's really the question. Is it possible, before we even get to the Quran, is it possible in the mind, can you conceive of the imkaniyah, the possibility, the conceivability to see Allah? So we said, and there was a very good example that came from yourself, which is the idea, so the basic premise is that anything that exists can be seen. That's the point. Whether you can see it or not is a different question. If it exists, it can be seen. And the example that you gave, that was good, was that if you're in a dark room. Now the reason why I can see you is because you exist. Albeit I am unable to see you due to some other reason. And I give you the example of the prayer. That the reason why the prayer is obligatory is because the Quran and the mutawatir sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But the way in which you manifest it is through the time. And so if there's no time, there's no prayer. But that doesn't mean it's not obligatory upon you. So likewise, something exists. For example, you take Zayd, Allah protect him and us. Let's say he's blind. Right? Now, technically this bottle is seeable to him. Albeit he is unable to see it. Now what's the reason? Not because it's atoms, or because it's accidents. And I even argue that technically it's possible in the mind for you to even see accidents. Albeit you won't see an accident separate from its body, since it doesn't exist except in its body. But that's not the reason why it's seeable. The reason why it's seeable is because it exists. So he may not be able to see the bottle of water, but that doesn't mean that he's not technically able to see the water. The bottle is seeable. Your mind, think about it. Is it inconceivable, for example, that something inconceivable in the mind? That there's something that exists that is unseeable. Unseeable to you, unseeable to me. But the fact that it exists, and I gave the example of jinn. And I said, just because a jinn I'm not able to see it, it doesn't mean that I'm not able to see it. I am technically able to see it because it exists. Albeit Allah has not created that type of means for me to be able to see it. Like sound waves. Technically they're seeable because they exist. albeit that Allah has not created it in that way for us to see sound waves. Yeah. So the idea is wujud. This is from what we would consider to be first principles, right? So then we argued on that basis. All right. And we spent a good while on it, by the way, Maulana. I know you were away, right? So we spent a long time on it. So if the idea is that something is in existence, right? Tayyib, wa alaikum salam. It's possible to be seen. Well, now, is it going to be seen? And we said, well, now it's neither here or there. We have to look at what the Quran says. And what does the religion say? And the Quran affirms, إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةً. And we looked at what the word nadara and ru'ya, that they mean the same thing, except a ru'ya is bidun qasd, bil qasd, with intention, without intention. You know, I just saw you, I didn't mean to see you. Whereas nadara, and we looked at some of the counter arguments from the Mu'tazila. But the common conclusion, and the crux, and this is going to run through today's lesson a little bit as well, which is, as long as there is no reason for us to interpretate those verses from the apparent meaning, then they just accept it as apparent meaning. Whereas when it came to Allah's hand and face, there was no way that we could have left that on its apparent meaning, since it would contradict an unequivocal verse in the Quran, like Laysa kamithlihi shay, and even our intellect. And so we were forced to move on to a ta'wil, to an interpretation. However, here we don't have to. So as far as we know, we will inshallah see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bila ihata, without encompassing, and it will be a type of knowledge that will occur, and inshallah. Now, how that will actually manifest in all of its finite beauty, in all of its kind of beauty, we'll only know once we taste it. Otherwise we could just theorize. As they say, you don't find God in the books of philosophy, but the books of philosophy are helpful tools to be able to push away doubt. But really, it's about taste. And then the second mas'ala that we looked at was khalqu af'al al-ibad, the idea of human efficacy, that who creates your acts. So remember we talked about that. So who actually makes your acts? And we said that for the Mu'tazila, they believed that it was the human being. The reason why we didn't make takfir, we didn't call them kafir, is because they said it's underneath Allah's power. So it's Allah gave you power through which now you create. Now, this is going to run into a little bit of today's lesson, so I may as well just mention this here and I won't have to mention it then. Which is that I mentioned last lesson that if I'm Zayd, now he's given the power to create some of his acts. His acts are accidents. So the world is made up of bodies and accidents. And he's able to produce some of his accidents, which means he's able to produce some of the world. You see how problematic that is? Now, a really good argument that you should think about on this one is, if it's possible, clearly if you're a Mu'tazili, it is possible that God can create a power by which you are able to create some of the world, i.e. your own acts, right? Your own acts that you do, make sound, jump up and down, this is part of the world. If you are doing that, you directly, not that it's God doing it, but He's given you the overall power and you're doing it. If you're producing something into the world, then you're part creator. Now what's to say now that He couldn't just give you more power to do more? Why just your act? Maybe you can make the rain fall. Maybe you can produce fruits from nothing. Maybe, and Imam al-Qushayri, he has a lovely line of poetry, and he mentions in that line of poetry that, well, if you can accept that you can create some accidents, then what's to stop? Why is it inconceivable that you can create some of the atoms as well? Mm-hmm.
So are they saying that it's not, it's your power, not God pushing that power through you?
No.
So they're saying it's actually your power.
It's actually your power.
Okay.
Why? Because if He's pushing it through you, the whole argument they're pushing this for is lost, which is God doesn't create evil. Because their entire issue was that how can God, the creator of evil is evil, and we said no, not the khaliq, not the creator of evil is evil, but the kasib, the one that earned it, i.e. the one that willed it, the one that wanted it, which is you and me. So we chose that evil. God just willed whatever we chose, right? So because under this kind of moral framework that they're running with, they can't accept that God created evil. So if He's just pushing the same thing through you, then what difference does it make whether He's the direct cause or whether He's the secondary cause? Do you see the point? So for them, you had to be the creator of those acts. Albeit it's God that's giving you the power, but now He's not in charge of what you're doing. You did this all by yourself. You see, that's khatir jiddan.
But obviously you see what like they're obviously trying to protect obviously Allah's like saying that obviously God doesn't
No doubt.
evil, but
No
they're opening up so many other
Philosophical problems. Whereas I think the theory of kasb was the strongest idea. That actually consolidates all of the verses in the Quran too, by the way. Because you've got verses that say you're going to be taken into account for what you do, even if it's a dharra, you'll see it on the Day of Judgment, right? But at the same time, by dharra I mean like a particle of dust, mustard seed, huh? Yeah, هذا هو, right? So you'll see it. Yet in the same way, Allah is saying that He is the creator of everything. He's Yahdi man yasha wa yudillu man yasha. He's the one that creates guidance and creates misguidance. How do you consolidate that except in this? That ultimately it's God that wills it, but you chose it, and it was from His will that He gave you that choice. So you're doing nothing out of His will. If you see that point?
Did you go through theodicy?
Yeah, as in you did, because one of the students asked about the idea of evil, and I said that there is no evil for God, since He's the one that assigns value to things. Like He's not bound by His own moral framework. You see the point? Like He's the one that gave you the acts and told you what's good and bad. How is He? This is for you. This is for you, not for Him. He created that within the realm of the world. He's not part of the world. Jalla fil ula. So that's a very important point, by the way. If people could just understand that, because that makes a lot of sense. If you're a computer programmer, you're not bound by the program that you just created. Albeit in the game, let's say you make a game, in the game the guy is dying, or you've done whatever, you're not bound by that. You produced that, right? So we spent a little while on that actually near the end of the lesson. So we looked at that in some detail. The next section from the book is going to kind of continue with this theme just a little bit. Naam. So we're reading now. Again, I don't know in your document where it is. It says we looked at al-istita'a. We looked at human capacity, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said when you will, Allah then creates the power and the effect. Remember that? So you will something, God then creates both the qudra and the fi'l, the power and the effect. And so some people said, well, that means He's giving you obligations that you're not able to fulfill because He hasn't given you the power. And we said that it's a silly argument, since the power will be produced on your asking for it, basically, on your petition for it. So it's exactly the same. So now we're reading from the bit where he says, وَلَا يُكَلَّفُ الْعَبْدُ بِمَا لَيْسَ فِي. Now, we've got to read basically 3/4 of a page, okay? Because we've got 3 lessons left, and we've got a lot of the text. So we've got all of this section to go, we've got this page to go, and a little bit on the end. So we've got 3 lessons, and I need to get to prophetology today. So from next lesson we could do the prophets and the wisdom of sending prophets and what we believe about them. And then one of the main areas that I want to focus on is the mas'ala of tafdeel and khulafa, because that's become an issue nowadays. So a lot of these issues are non-issues today. Like they're still important for us to know, so I'll explain them, but I won't dwell on them. I really won't. And the reason being is because those are not really different amongst the Muslims today. Not in that way. Whereas in those issues today about the khulafa, the battles between the Sahaba, there is a lot of misconception about those sorts of things. And so I would like to focus on that a little bit as we get near the end. Do you get that point? Yeah. Like which Muslim alive today, illa 1 or 2 that have gone rogue, will deny the existence of paradise or the fact that the prophets intercede on the Day of Judgment. Illa yujad ba'ad. There are. But the overwhelming majority of Muslims, whether they're Ashari, Maturidi, Salafi, all accept these sorts of things, right? Except a few tafarrud.
But isn't there like points to be made about arguing against secular liberal norms as well?
Yeah, there are.
So denial of paradise to prove against.
Well, when we do the mu'jizat, I think that would be the main. I think when we do miracles, that's in prophets.
Even like causality, the idea of God being the ultimate cause and stuff,
There are still some people, but I think generally the overwhelming majority of Muslims today. Khalas. Well, yeah. Let's do that. Okay, fine. That's no problem. Okay. So then he said, وَلَا يُكَلَّفُ الْعَبْدُ بِمَا لَيْسَ فِي وُسْعِهِ. Can you see that where that is? So the servant is not obliged. يُكَلَّفُ ya taklif. When we use the word taklif, if you're a mukallaf with a fatha on the lam, Allah is mukallif with the kasra on the lam. Mukallaf means that you're legally obliged by the sacred law. Yes? You're legally obliged. So if you're adult, you're sane, you're Muslim, the message came to you, hakada, all of these things make you a mukallaf. This is called taklif from Allah. Now the argument is that Allah does not give taklif except what you can achieve. And there were a number of ways of looking at this. One was, Allah will not legally oblige you to do something which is rationally impossible. Allah will never oblige you legally, that you have to do it as a Muslim, to do something that is impossible in the mind, like producing a square circle. Allah will not give you taklif in that way. Then there's tier 2 and tier 3 in which there's a difference. Tier 3 is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you taklif in things that you could have done it, except that He willed otherwise. Now what does that mean? He willed otherwise. This is how they write it in the commentaries. What this means is that ultimately Allah willed a particular thing. So He said, Allah says to you, pray. You, ma'adallah, Zayd chooses not to pray. Okay? Now Allah willed for him to not pray, meaning Allah is the one that ultimately willed it and created it, even though He chose it. Yeah? Yes, you get this point here, right? So Allah did will it, but was it possible for him to have had the choice to do the other one? Yes. So Allah will give you taklif, and this is ijma' on that. Everybody accepts that type of taklif. That Allah will give you that type of taklif, that you could have possibly done the other one, albeit He willed for you to do the other for your choosing, etc. The middle tier, the tier 2, is where something would Allah give you taklif to do something which is empirically impossible. What's the difference between empirically impossible and ontologically impossible? Ontologically impossible is something that cannot happen in the mind, like tier 1 that we said. Allah will not give you taklif, legally oblige you to do something that is rationally inconceivable. Everybody with me on that? Tier 2 is, would Allah give you taklif to do something which is possible in the mind, but is empirically impossible? Like, for example, like flying. Like flying. It's against aada, what we call aada, Allah's norm, convention in creation. Yep. Would Allah give you taklif to fly? So here, the scholars differ on this. Some said no. Some said, well, it may not be that He does, like He doesn't actually give you taklif to do that. Yet it is rationally possible for Him to do that, since it could be a miracle. He could give you taklif to do something and then create a miracle for you to be able to do it. Right? Did you get that point here? So it's yeah, it will come. Well, the thing is, okay. I could have done it here, and I could do it when we actually do al-Khawariq al-Ada, because it will have a... I'm going to see. The reason being is because I really want to get to that, and I'll focus on the when we do the prophets, because you know what's going to happen in those sorts of things are going to come the miracles of the prophets. So you've got people, for example, that have denied miracles of the prophets. So when we do the prophets, I'd prefer to focus on it then. But yalla namshi, yani bala shuf inshallah. Okay, so this what was I saying? Naam. So adatan. So some of the scholars said no, some of the scholars said yes. But the idea is it rationally inconceivable that God will give you taklif of something that, albeit you haven't seen it, is technically possible? There's nothing to stop that from happening. Why? Because look, when I say ada, empirical data, what we know empirically, we can never know beyond what we can infer. Right? So like if you were to do science, for example, and I was to say to you, does a unicorn exist? Now you would say no, but all of you accept that it is possible for a unicorn to exist. Sah? Naam, of course it is. Now the argument that you had, Muslim scholars and other theologians, not just Muslims, made these arguments long before Popper and Kuhn, but they were probably the most articulate writers of the philosophy of science, the idea of... Because you see, what happened to religion is, RE, religious education, became philosophy of religion. So now, like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, although he was a Muslim according to many Muslims, not according to Imam al-Ghazali, of course, but he was a great philosopher, right? And he was a great alim, there's no doubt about that. You see, he was one of the first philosophers of religion in Islam. where he looked at religion as a philosopher, as opposed to treating it as a religious person would. So this idea, now in the modern West, they don't teach you religious education. They teach you the philosophy of religion, which is where they basically attack it the way you would attack any other idea. Yeah, totally skeptic to begin with, and then building up in some kind of Cartesian fashion, right? Yeah, so that's what they would do. Now, so if you take science now, some people did that to science. To say, well, let's do the same thing to science and say, well, the knowledge that science gives you, is it absolute and certain? So for example, if I was to say to you, A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, therefore A is bigger than... Now that's a deductive proof, isn't it? I used a basic syllogism of premise 1, premise 2, and I came out with a conclusion. Now, depending on the different ashkal and the different ways that these premises come, and these type of syllogisms come, the formats, i.e., the deduction that you will get at the end, provided premise 1 and premise 2 are true, the result will necessarily be true. For example, if I said to you, I mentioned this I think one of the earlier classes, if I said to you, for example, all milk is black, I have milk, therefore the milk I have is black. Now, that's a valid syllogism, but it's not true. Says the premise 1 was not true. All milk is not black. So, I'm not even using Arabic. You get that bit, right? Yeah. He complained to me last time, too much Arabic. I only said Assalamu alaikum. Right, so now, if it was true though, if it was true, premise 1 and premise 2, the necessity of the result from that, the natija, what follows from it, what the entailment from it is, will necessarily be true. You get that point, right? If A is indeed bigger than B and B is indeed bigger than C, then A would indeed be bigger than C. So now, inference obviously is going from all of these particular instances that you can see, and then inferring, istiqra'. In our tradition, there's two kinds of inference, istiqra' tam and istiqra' naqis. Istiqra' tam is where you have a complete study. And that's possible. Like for example, if I said all of I don't know why the word jelly beans just popped into my head. If all of the jelly beans that are in this bucket before me, right, if I said, if I looked at each individual one, and I said, oh wow, look at this jelly bean, that's red. Oh, look at that one, it's red. Look at that one, it's red. And I surveyed every single jelly bean, such that there's no jelly beans left. This is called an istiqra' tam. It's a complete inference. So I've looked at every single example, now I can know for certain. Because there's no other jelly bean available. I've got them all here. Whereas, when you're dealing with the world, the inferences that you're using are never going to be tam. Impossible. Impossible for you to have that. Like for example, the argument of the moon splitting. This is not our topic today, right? But yalla, we can touch on it, right? The idea of the moon splitting, the Prophet ﷺ split the moon, reported to us through mass transmission. Mutawatir chains. Sorry? Of course, yeah. Although some people try to interpret it that way. In shiqaq al-qamar in the Quran, when shaqqa al-qamar, that this is referring to the Day of Judgment. But people have to understand the asbab al-nuzul, that when these verses were reported. Ala kullin, in any case, we have mass transmitted reports that the Prophet ﷺ split the moon. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Now, if somebody was to say, but it's impossible for the moon to be split, this is not true. Empirically, even empirically, the problem is going to be that you could say empirically it doesn't happen, the moon doesn't split. But do you have enough data and knowledge to say that every million years, every 2 million years, every 2,000-3,000 years, that the moon doesn't split? Do you have that knowledge?
Not for certain.
Not for certain. Do you see the point? Is there any way you can say that that 1400 years, it's been 1440, right? We're in now, alhamdulillah, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And what's to say that every 200,000 years, let's say, the moon doesn't split? You have no knowledge of that. You have no way of proving that. You can say that, well, from what we know, the moon doesn't split, we've seen it every single day. Like people say, oh, how is the sun going to come back up from where it sets before the Day of Judgment? But what's to say that is the norm that Allah created? Just because you haven't seen beyond that, it doesn't mean that it isn't true. We are going based upon, science will always give you the highest probability. And that it is what we call tasdeeq, غلبة الظن. نعم. In the levels of tardid, of doubt. غلبة الظن is where you are highly sure, but you are not certain. Yaqeen is very different. Yaqeen comes through deduction or through istiqra' tam, through a complete inference, not through a part inference. So the idea about miracles, like for example, people say, how is it that water came? And one brother, who denies miracles in the UK, he said, I don't need, water coming from the hands of the Prophet ﷺ to believe that he was great, right? Look, at the end of the day, what's to say that every 200,000-300,000 years there's not a man that's created from whose hands water comes? What's to say that? What knowledge do you have with certainty to say that? Just because you haven't seen it in your very small lived experience, and even our very small scientific experience, you have nothing to say that. Yeah. So, now, although we don't believe that happens every 200,000 years, we believe it was a miracle. But the breaking of habit is not a problem for us, since habit is built upon inference and not upon deduction. The causal effect between A and B, how can you know it for certain? You can't. Sorry? Hume, right? And I'll tell you, Pir Karim Shah Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, he's got he was a great Imam of his age, but he lived in a very simple village in Pakistan. And he wrote a seerah book on the Prophet ﷺ in 7 volumes. The 6th volume was a kind of breakdown of Orientalism, those that study Islam, why they study Islam. His volume 7 was a response to him. In any case, in the seerah on the Mi'raj, he directly speaks to Hume and to Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan, because that was like the main man in the West and the main man in the East. And that's the argument, he uses the argument of istiqra' tam and istiqra' naqis. That he says to Hume, essentially, have you kind of studied every single aspect of the universe before you can make a judgment on what absolutely is a direct causal effect between A and B? Like for example, if I was to lift this pen up, and this would be disrespectful to the pen, but if I was to lift this pen up, Assalamu alaikum, and I was to drop it like that, right, and I was to do it again, you would say, looking at the laws of gravity, and your knowledge of it, and I'm careful with that, your knowledge of it, that every time I drop it 99 times, and the 100th time it's going to drop. But can you guarantee that there's not, it's like, when you go through like a drive-through, and suddenly they give you lots of free things because they say you're like our 10,000th customer. You weren't to know. You weren't to know that was the habit, that you were going to be a part of it, but it was what it was. That was their habit. So what's to say? You have no way of saying, you can only say from what we know. But what's to say that at some point that could not change? There's no way that we can know causal effect through deduction.
So we can disprove cause and effect without resorting to God. As in, once we bring God into the picture,
there's.
But before that, even you're saying that cause and effect.
How? And that was exactly the argument that people made. He did, but that people made, even the philosophers. Yeah. So yeah. Right, exactly. So this is exactly right. Well, I'm saying even in the West, the whole idea of postmodernism came out of this idea, what you just said. That how can you actually know what you know? So, that's a separate subject altogether. But what I'm saying is there any way that you can know for certain that A will lead to B? No, you can only have a good guess at it, highly probable for it. So now if a miracle happened, it's not impossible in the mind that there was a miracle. See, a square triangle, now this is something that's not possible. Miracles will not fit into that. A miracle is al-khariq anil-'ada. It steps away from the norm, the habit, convention. Because the laws of nature are what we call the norms of nature. They're adat. They're the norms that Allah has placed. Rahmatan, as a mercy. Why? Because imagine you turn the cooker on and water comes out. Imagine you turn the tap on and fire comes out. The last time you ever wash your hands. Right? Like imagine. So for us, we don't need this necessarily, because we believe in it from the Quran. Allah says about Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was thrown into the fire, Allah said to the fire, Ya nari kuni ala Ibrahim, Ya naru kuni salama ala Ibrahim. O fire, be for Abraham peacefully cool. So the effect of fire became peacefully cool as opposed to ihraq, to burning. So why does anybody have a problem with that? It's just habit. You've got no way of proving that fire will always burn in every single situation. What's there to prove that? You see, when you open up that debate a little bit, the idea of inference becomes very, very important. You going to say?
Oh, no.
Tayyib. Good.
The example for that would be also, could you go with the eclipse? So the standard norm would be sun, obviously,
Right.
And
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of a sudden,
So if you lived in a period where you only heard about an eclipse and you never saw an eclipse, imagine you speak to a 10-year-old and they haven't seen an eclipse, or a 15-year-old, Assalamu alaikum, a 20-year-old, I don't know, whatever, they haven't seen an eclipse, and you say there was an eclipse, and they'll be like, nah. But let's say beyond, that's just a simple example. Imagine even with all of your scientific knowledge, you haven't come upon that particular thing happening just yet. But that's not to say that it won't happen.
What about something like tsunami? That particular as well, where the first tsunami that happened, where there's no norm for that, something like that happened, but then when it happened,
But there's like a natural cause argument there.
Yeah. I don't know. I see your point. I do get your point. Yeah, even I know. I'm if it's a helpful example to get the point of understanding, I'm happy to run with it. We'll call it qareeb, not a ta'rif, right? But so long as you get the idea that you can only infer norms of nature, you cannot know them deductively necessarily. And our inference, had it been a complete inference, we could have had certainty. But we don't have a complete inference, we could only have a part inference. And so we can't say with absolute, and in that case, you cannot deny the existence of miracles. Because what's to say that every 10, 20,000 years, and we have Dr. Naghman here now, what's to say that every million years that's possible? We don't have a lot of data to support all of these sorts of things. We can only go off the science that we've got. And that, once you bring science into a level playing field, and this is what people like Popper and Kuhn and our philosophers and Mutakallimun did that a lot earlier. But once you highlight the vulnerability of science, suddenly the argument changes. It changes. And that's important for us to understand. And that's why, so what did they start doing then? They started attacking deduction. And this is not, I'm going to go off that. They started attacking people like John Stuart Mill, people like Bertrand Russell, that's it. They started to attack deduction, because for them, the idea of getting to the height of skepticism was very, very important, and what they considered to be the height of intellectualism. But in any case, that's a separate discussion altogether. So moving on with the text. So we looked at Allah, what taklif He can give you. Then He says, وَمَا يُوجَدْ مِنَ الْأَلَمِ. Was that all in that taklif bit? That was, yeah. Okay. Okay. وَمَا يُوجَدْ. Now the rest we can just pretty much read. He says, and وَمَا يُوجَدْ مِنَ الْأَلَمِ فِي الْمَضْرُوبِ عَقِيبْ ضَرْبِ إِنسان وَالْإِنْكِسَارُ فِي الزُّجَاجِ عَقِيبْ كَسْرِ إِنسان كُلُّ ذَلِكَ مَخْلُوقُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لَا صُنْعَ لِلْعَبْدِ فِي تَخْلِيقِهِ. He says, so the pain that one feels once they're struck, the breaking of a glass once it's broken, all of these effects are directly created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the human being has no partaking in it whatsoever, except that he had kasb. He may have chosen to do it internally, but the acts were created directly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we believe, which led on to a theory in the West, what they call occasionalism. They called it like al-hawadith in the Islamic tradition, the al-hawadith. The idea that we believe that when you have these conventions, these norms of nature, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates indaha la biha. What that means is Allah does not create through anything. So going back to your discussion about causality, the Mu'tazila believed, let's say for example, if I hit this and that sound that you heard, or I broke, this is not glass, it's plastic, but let's say it was glass and I broke it. Now that breakage that you've just witnessed here, they would say that was caused by me. That's the first thing they would say. But that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the power and He deposited within this the capacity to break. Not that it was God that broke it. So it's a theory that they call mustawdi'. So Allah deposited this power in things. So take for example medicine. If I eat medicine, will I be cured? They would say yes, because Allah has created within the nature of that medicine cure. You see, there was the philosophers, what they call at-tabi'iyun or at-tabi'iyun, they believe that it wasn't even God. This is just emanated from him in that way. That this naturally within its taba' has this kind of healing power. Whereas the Mu'tazila said, no, it has inherently the healing power, but because God has deposited it in there. You see, so the tabi'iyun, do you get that point? Did you get that point? Yeah. The tabi'iyun are kuffar. Whereas the Mu'tazila, we don't make takfir of them. Why?
Are these like deistic naturalists?
Yes. And why? Well, not necessarily. Yeah, they are. They don't have to be, but in this regard they were, because they were speaking about some particular. Yeah. So this. Yeah. So.
By accident. Is that what they're saying?
Not necessarily by accident. Like for example, if you look at it from the Muslim perspective, they would say because God is perfect and all-knowing, then He created it all perfect. Well, it emanated from Him in this perfect and kind of without willing it. Yeah. Yeah. So it's within its taba'. Now, the reason why we made takfir of the naturalists and not of the Mu'tazila is because of an issue of what they would call lazim qareeb and lazim ba'id in the discussion of takfir. So pay attention to this one, and you'll understand, because I was wondering whether you're thinking that so far when we've been looking at the Mu'tazila, it's been quite odd. There's been a lot of shirkul asbab, about part creating, but we haven't made takfir of them. We don't call them unbelievers, we call them ahlul bid'ah. I mean, they don't exist today. Well, they do actually in a kind of contemporary and progressive form, but we don't make takfir of them. Why? Because there's two words. There's one, iltizamul kufr, and there's istilzamul kufr. Istilzamul kufr is somebody said something, and technically it will lead to kufr, but the thing that person said or did is not direct kufr, but it will lead to kufr. So because it will lead to kufr, there's something in between, we don't make takfir on them. Whereas iltizamul kufr, from bab ifti'al, to take on the effect, i.e. that person becomes a kafir because what they just said or did is directly kufr. So they're two very different things. Do you get the point? So what the Mu'tazila are saying is not direct kufr, but if you kept the ball rolling, it will take you to kufr. A very slippery slope. Some of the ulama, look, not all of the Sunnis didn't make takfir of them. Some did. Imam Birgawi, yeah, actually, yeah, in Tariq al-Muhammadiyya. I was shocked because it's a book of tasawwuf, right? But because part of tasawwuf is aqidah. Like you can't be a spiritual being if your aqidah is batil. Basically, you can't. You could have a. Apparently now you can. Well, interesting. We're going to do that if we get there. The Karamiyya held the opinion that you could be we do iman. Are we going to get there today? Inshallah. That you can so long as you utter la ilaha illallah, even if you don't believe it, you can still be a believer. Oh, wow. They said that. Yeah, that was their opinion. And it was an odd one, but they had that opinion. Okay, so we believe that is directly created by this. By the way, also opens up a discussion of tawassul. The idea that can you take the Prophet ﷺ as an intermediary to God? Now some people would say no. But if you understand kalam, and you understand that what does it mean for someone to be a means? For example, if I said, oh Allah, for the sake of the Prophet ﷺ, forgive me. Right? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala nabi. Sallu ala nabi. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Whoa. Okay, mashallah. Let's get to Babul Imama quicker. Babul Imama. We got some. Okay, nah. Alright. Sorry? Oh, Babul Imama. Yeah. Just Fahim man fahim. Okay. So, he did it. He's mashallah. So, the idea. What was I saying? Al-Wasilat al-Udhma, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the greatest means to Allah. See, look, if I said to you, I take medicine, antibiotics, right, as a means for my cure. But as a Sunni, in the meaning of what we mean of Sunni, Ash'ari Maturidi, do I believe that the cure is in that medicine? No, except that it's from God's habit, His Sunnah, the aada within the world, that when you take that means, He creates the effect with it, not through it, at the same time. And so He doesn't have to. And we can see this within those verses in the Quran now. He didn't create the burning in the fire. But so the burning is created indal nar, along with the fire, not bin nar, not through the fire, in some kind of causal way. So likewise, if I said, "Oh Allah, forgive me for the sake of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam." Now, even the wasila, we know that Allah is creating the effect with it, not through it. So for someone to say that it's like having some kind of demigod, do you know what I'm trying to say? Or that you're kind of giving something of Allah's attributes to somebody else, they haven't understood kalam.
They have to prove that's rationally impossible.
They have to prove that that's rationally impossible. That's very true. So do you get that point here? So even when we take wasila, ultimately we know where the power is coming from, even in the wasila. That even it's not through the wasila, it's with the wasila. Do you get the point? So Allah, it's not, for example, if I say to Mullah over here, "Give me something." Now he gives it to me. He actually physically puts it in my hand. We would believe that the effect was not through him, but Allah created the effect with him. Do you get the point? If I say to him that, "Look, my arm's going to sleep, can you give it a few whacks?" Right? And he does that just to wake up my arm. Do arms go to sleep? Or legs go to sleep? Right? Can you do that? Now we would say that the effect is created directly by Allah with this means, not actually through it. That's the power of God. Jalla fil ula. He is the creator in every moment. In every moment. Nothing in this world shares from His power. Not even in that sense. Not even in a temporary kind of sense of the Mu'tazila. No, He directly creates everything in every single moment. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So where's the shirk in taking a wasila through the Prophet ﷺ? Where could be the shirk? If you were to say, "Oh Allah, forgive me for His sake," or even if you were to be at His blessed grave and you were to say, "Ya Rasulullah, ask Allah to forgive me," where would the shirk come from? You could say it doesn't work. You can say it's bid'ah because the Prophet never did it or never taught it. You may argue that. I'm not saying that you can argue that. I'm saying you may argue that. That's fine. No problem. We're all up for discussion and debate and growth in Islam. No problem. But where can you argue that it's shirk? If the person believes that even as a means, ultimately God creates the effect with, not even through. Not even through that means.
It'll come down to what the causal relationship with that person believes.
With that person? Yeah. So we believe that all effects are directly created by God.
As long as you have that belief at the grave, what can you say?
Sorry?
As long as you have that.
As long as you have that belief. Yeah. And inshallah, I don't believe that. Whether people know the technical terms, I think ultimately they know. Inshallah. But again, there are some people, and this is why education is important. Yeah.
So the ones who don't believe in the Sila, for example, they'll say, how do they explain what you just said?
Well,
yeah. Through but with, how do they explain that?
No, because they will just use verses in the Quran that will say that not to call upon anyone other than Allah. We understand the same thing. No one calls upon other than Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, jalla fil ula. Well, what we mean is exactly that, the way we just understood it. That nobody is independent of God. Nobody. Not even ashraf al-makhluqat. The greatest of God's creation is...
doesn't believe in wasila. I thought everybody's agreed on.
No, the Salafis... No. The Salafis believe in wasila through acts and God's names and attributes, not through ashkhas, adwat, essences, people. Within the you could say the Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah in a broad sense, people do differ on it. Some people say that istighatha at the grave is okay, but from distance is not. Not because it's shirk, but because it's not established necessarily. And some people say it's from distance and closeness. It's not shirk.
I thought it was agreed upon that you can do wasila.
Not from people. No.
The problem they always talk about is the ghasl.
No. We understand istighatha to be tawassul. We don't understand anything from istighatha. We don't believe that there's any ghawth other than Allah.
They have a problem with tawassul from the get-go.
Yeah, they have a problem with tawassul from the get-go.
Stop you when you go to Medina as well, don't you?
Yeah, they do. But we, as Shaykh Abdul Hakim, he said we don't even complain about the taps in Medina. So even if they hit you or say whatever, we say Medina. Love us. We have nothing negative to say about Medina. Okay. Okay, moving on. So that's an important point actually. I'm glad that I mentioned that. I'm not unhappy. وَالْمَقْتُولُ مَيِّتٌ بِأَجْلِهِ, and the one that is killed is dead in his proper time. وَالْمَوْتُ قَائِمْ بِالْمَيِّتِ, I'll explain on this. And death is basically an accident created in the mayyit, the dead, the deceased body. مَخْلُوقٌ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى or مَخْلُوقُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, it's God's creation. لَا صُنْعَ لِلْعَبْدِ فِيهِ, there's no part that the slave takes in it. تَخْلِيقٍ وَلَا اكْتِسَابًا, meaning that you cannot do cusp of the time for you to die. Now you may choose to commit suicide as an act, but you will die when Allah decreed for you to die. Yes, that's the way it is. And you have no part in takhliq of that. وَالْأَجْلْ وَاحِدٌ, and so this decree is one. Now what does that mean? وَالْأَجْلْ وَاحِدٌ and الْمَقْتُولُ مَيِّتْ بِأَجْلِهِ. There were different groups on this one, and I'm not gonna. This is again, it's not a living argument, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But just a,
That's funny because it's about death and stuff. Anyway.
just a summary of the argument. There were some, for example, the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, oddly, again, they had two groups on this. So some of the Mu'tazila, they said that Allah decrees, let's say, Zayd to live till 40. That's the ajal, what we call the ajal, the moment for him to die. But if he was to be killed at the age of 30, then he was decreed to die at 40, but the killer has cut it off at 30. Because they've got no problems in creating acts, you see. They've got no problems in that. Do you see the point? We produce our own acts, if you remember. So they would say that you've cut him off early. That's one madhab. The other madhab, the other school is, they said God said he will either die at 30 or at 40, and the killer chose which one of those two was going to be. If he killed him at 30, khalas. If he let him go until 40, khalas. These were the two schools of the Mu'tazila. Now both of them are of course bogus for us. Why? Because if you were to say that God decreed for him to die at 30, and the killer came and cut it off at what did I say, 30? 40, and then the killer cuts it off at 30, then what you're basically saying is that God is incapable of actualizing his decree. That he decreed one thing and somebody overruled him, basically. So how does that work? It works fine if you create your own act and you're happy to take something away from God's power. Do you see what kind of problems come out from that? Because this came out from that idea of human efficacy, or their understanding of human efficacy. That you could cut God off. God decreed 40, and you come and you take that at the age of 30.
So is that a solution of tackling the problems Qadariyya and Jabariyya?
I think the Mu'tazila saw themselves.
The actions came into.
Yeah, they do. They were because we in these issues. You're right. You're quite right. In these issues, we brush the Mu'tazila and the Qadariyya into one grouping.
Yeah.
We do.
And the Jabariyya felt.
Well, they you've got nothing to nothing. We say you've got the control of choosing, and then God will create accordingly. Whereas they would believe that you don't even have control over the choice. Yeah, entirely determinist.
Jabariyya would say, yeah, you're responsible for your acts.
Directly, you will actually produce that effect in the world. Yeah.
So we were trying to create a middle ground.
Yeah, I think they did it. I think the theory of Qasb was very, very strong. Now, and that is our aqeedah basically. And I think that is the safest position. Sorry, were you going to say something? Sorry, were you finished, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to clarify.
Yes.
I don't want to go too much tangent, but have you read anything? Salafis have a concept of creating your own actions as well.
Yeah, they do.
I see this all the time. So do you have knowledge?
I'm not. No, I don't know about that in detail. But I mean, I think in terms of the pre-eternality of the world, that's one issue that they have. That's very similar to the Mu'tazila. And in terms of khalq af'al al-ibad, but I'm not kind of focused studied on that. So I would choose not to go into it at this point, unless I say something wrong. If that's okay with you. Okay, khalas. طيب. So what we believe is ajal wahid. No, he died when God decreed for him to die. Now, whether that person was killed at 30 or 40, that was the decree that God had already written through his knowledge, not his forcing it to happen, in the sense that he did not make that person majboor to kill him at that stage, but he knew, and so he had decreed for him to live at that stage. Do you get that point?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, could God change, for example?
Yeah, okay, alright. Yeah, so okay, good. So there is a question. I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because I would have forgotten. If it was even in my mind to begin with. Okay. But it's good that you mentioned it. The idea of, you have certain ahadith, reports from the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that nothing changes decree except dua. So can you supplicate? Or the certain special nights, Does that change your decree? Now there's a number of positions of Ahl Sunnah on this. One position, which is considered the dominant position, is that the change that's referred to in these reports is a majazi change. It's a metaphorical change. It's not really a change. Meaning, the Prophet told us that by sadaqah, charity, you increase your lifespan. Now, what that means is that God had already written for you a long lifespan. Some would say He just wrote it for you, and when you give charity, it's a metaphorical increase because you feel more blessing in your life. That's one school. And that's the dominant position of the Ahl Sunnah. Another position of Ahl Sunnah is that they say that God decreed for you both. If you gave charity, you would live till 40, whatever. And if you did not give charity, then you would live to that. And that choice is left down to you. So whichever one you chose, it was within your decree. But that's a less dominant position, but it is a position which is there. Some would say that within the decree, it was that you were going to make dua and He was going to increase your life. Again, it falls back into that metaphorical understanding. So we would say that God has a decree which is absolute and eternal. But you have these metaphorical instances where you felt like your life was going one way, something happened and it changed that way. But actually it was decreed for that to already happen to you. I guess a little bit more autonomy for the individual is the second position, which is the idea that I know now that if I gave charity, it's within the decree of God, that if I gave charity, it will increase my life. But that's ultimately within the decree. But if I don't, then it won't. And that's ultimately within the decree also. So they're not really saying too much different on that one. So that's how we understand it. In reality, the decree is the same.
So something is infinite forever, yeah, and something is temporal. So you gave two positions, but then isn't the case that if you're saying both are in there, but really there's only, because you said one is metaphorical, but really it's the thing that actually happens through this whole mechanism of qasm that is a real thing.
Yes, of course. And this is why the first position was the stronger position, which is it really is just a metaphor. It's a metaphorical change, not an accurate change. In that, yeah. Jazakallah. All right, okay, let's move on then. So, wal haramu rizqun. I did mention this again. It's not an issue that I don't think anyone's debating it. I don't know if people are discussing it, but that haram is rizq. Let me just read it. وكل يستوفي رزق نفسه حلالا كان أو حراما ولا يتصور أن لا يأكل إنسان رزقه أو يأكل غيره رزقه والله تعالى يضل من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء. The idea that the Mu'tazila believe that, okay, so the crux of the argument for them was this, that whatever you own is your rizq. Whatever is your milkiyat is your rizq. Your rizq is what? Your ownership. So if you stole something, it's haram, isn't it? So they would say, because it's haram, even if you consumed it, you benefited from it, it's not your rizq. That was not your rizq. That was the rizq of somebody else. So this is a bit of a strange, and this comes out of the khalq af'al al-ibad. Because what they would say is that I can give my rizq to you by transferring ownership. I can give rizq to you. You see the problem here? See, once you've taken that autonomy of power from God, now you're not only creating your own acts, but you're giving people rizq. Do you see the problem? Whereas we say, al-milkiyah is not rizq, but whatever you consume, this is rizq, even if it's haram. Even if it's haram. So I can't give you my rizq. That was already your rizq. And you can't give me your rizq, it was already my rizq. So whatever you consume, whether it's halal or haram. So this is a really beautiful understanding for us because, sometimes people worry about their rizq a lot. And ultimately, you're only going to get what's decreed for you. The only choice you have is how you want to achieve it. You heard the story about I think it was a companion, yeah, who was going in to pray salah, and he said to another man outside, he says, "Can you watch my horse or my camel? I can't remember. I just need to pray quickly." And the man said, "Yeah, no, probably." Wait, and he thought, "What a nice guy. When I come out, I'll give him 2 dirhams." Yeah, and so he prayed. He came out, and the camel or the horse was still there, but the saddle had gone. Must have been a horse, right? Yeah, or the saddle was gone. So he thought, he took my. So he went out into the market, and he went to the market where they saw his saddle there. The guy obviously, sold it. And he goes, hey, that's my saddle. He goes, no, it's not, I bought it. He was like, okay, fine, but how much will you sell it to me for? And he says, well, I bought it for 2, and I'll sell it to you for 4. And he said, fine. And then he thought, subhanallah, I was going to give him those 2 anyway for watching it. But he nicked it, sold it in the market, and he got 2. He was going to get that 2 regardless from Allah. But the choice was how he was going to do it. So it's still your rizq. You're going to get it no matter what. طيب. Then he says, Allah guides whom He wants and He misguides whom He wants. Again, this is under the same, it's just a carry-on of different masail from the same discussion. Allah creates the effect of guidance in you. It's an accident. He creates the effect of misguidance in you. You earn it though. You desired it and God created it. That's all it's saying. So He does not force you into misguidance. Even when Allah says, Khatam Allahu ala qulubihim, Allah stamps your hearts. This comes through a perpetual of bad deeds until you earned a black heart. Because one sin brings a black dot onto your heart, and another, until you've blackened your heart entirely. And the result of your petitioning to God to create this stamp is that it's sealed. So it's your own doing. But it's God that creates it. So I can't create guidance.
It's like heart attack.
Gee?
Like heart attack.
Heart?
You carry anything bad stuff and then eventually you come to a heart attack.
No, I don't know. I think that's more like the Mu'tazili. The idea is that God creates the hidayah as soon as you want it inside. The moment you want guidance, He will create it. The moment you want to do something good, He will create it. He creates the. This is the same lesson, by the way. We've not digressed from the lesson. It's that same discussion about God creating your acts. You just petition for them, and He creates the effect and the power. So the idea is that God does not. He does not. على كل. Okay. وما هو الأصلح للعبد. Okay, this is it's not a big discussion, but it was a big difference between us and the Mu'tazila. They said, and Allah must do that which is as-salah lil-abd. What this means is, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. We've got so much to get through. ما هو الأصلح للعبد, which means that God must do what is best for, or what's in the best interest for His servants. He has to do what's best for you. Now, this was an argument that, fine, if you're coming from a perspective of kind of of morality, then surely God would only do what's good for you. This is the way they would look at it. But the argument wasn't able to stand because we can see clear instances within the world where that's not happening. Where, for example, or at least not the way we can see it. So let's say, for example, somebody being born disabled and living their entire life disabled, for example. Maybe you can say, well, that would just preserve them from kufr. But what about the person that grew up, became a kafir, died as a kafir? Wouldn't it have been better, more in his best interest, that God took his life while he was a minor? I mean, rather than him going to hell for the rest of eternity, wouldn't it have been better for God to do that? So we don't believe. So when this question was posed to the Mu'tazila, they tried to get out of it, and they produced this theory of lutf or al-iwad, which is this idea that, oh well, if God does something, He will give you something in response. He'll give you something in response. But again, it doesn't. Well, fine, we can say that, like God, the Prophet said, nothing, no thorn pricks the believer except that it expiates your sins. We can accept that at that level. But the idea to say that it's wajib upon God. Now, where did the Maturidis also say it's wajib that God does aslah? But what's the difference? The Mu'tazila said it's wajib ala Allah. It's binding upon God that He must do what's good for His slaves. Whereas the Maturidis, the Hanafi, said it's wajib min Allah. It's God has written it for Himself to do what's good for His servants. Even if they can't see what good it is for them. They're unable to see it. Or that He gave them chances, etc. Whatever it may be. The idea is that it's not binding on God. Like for example, Allah says, Kataba ala nafsihi ar-rahmah. God wrote for Himself what? Mercy. But He doesn't have to be merciful. So there's no denying that He is merciful. But nothing can oblige mercy on God. No. Except that He wrote it for Himself. Meaning He promised certain things and we will get those certain things, and he doesn't go against those promises. But nothing to say that it's wajib on God. So there's no restricting God's power to say that he has to do what we think is in our best interest, which is what the Mu'tazila was saying. Because the world around you is very different to that. You know, it's you can't say that.
So did they restrict the meaning then, and that's where they've kind of gone wrong?
How do you mean?
Mercy, justice, and so forth.
Yeah, but
Find it.
yeah, and you know the issues about like disasters and things, they got stuck on that. They actually had no response to that because the lutf and iwad they came up with, but to a certain point they had no response. But because they were coming from this paradigm, I told you, their paradigm is a moral paradigm. Everything has to fit into their understanding of morality. You could say they were moralists.
Did Imam actually ask that question of Jubai?
Yeah, so there's a story about it. Whether he actually asked that story or not, it's written in our books. Yes,
But it's become famous.
it's become very famous. Yeah, that comes more into So the story is about Abu Ali al-Jubai was his uncle, and he was like a leading Mu'tazili. He had trained Imam al-Ashari to be the great. Was it a stepfather? Ala kullin, and
He was his teacher though.
he was his teacher, that's for sure, yeah. So he says to him, about three people, and he says to three brothers, and he says one brother, he grows up, he becomes a good Muslim, he does good, he dies, what's going to happen to him? He says, Yuthab fil Jannah, he'll be rewarded in paradise. He says, well, the other one, he grows up as a kafir, and he dies as a kafir, what about him? And he says, yu'aqab, yani fil nar, or yu'adhab fil nar. He says, he's going to be punished in the hellfire. And this is the third one, who basically, he dies before he comes of age. So he's not mukallaf. Where's he going to be? Because he's done no good and he's done no bad. And he says, he's fil manzila bayn al-manzilatayn. He's in like a station between two stations. So he's neither there, neither here. That's not really correct of how they believe it in the hereafter, by the way. I'll explain that now. That story does not represent their actual belief of that. But anyway, that he's in a station between two stations. So he said, well, what if he said, isn't it aslah? So the story is beneficial here. He says, isn't it aslah for the little one that he says to Allah, why didn't you let me grow up so I could have followed my other brother, become a good Muslim, and I could have been in paradise rather than just hanging out outside the gates? Basically. And he says, because Allah will say to him, I knew had you grown up you would have become a kafir and you would have gone to the fire, so I saved you. So he says, what about the other brother who says, well, what about me? Why don't you take me when I was younger? فَبُهِتَتْ al-Jubai, as I say, right? That he became dumbfounded. In any case with the story, it does highlight that problem, doesn't it? It's a good story. Yeah, it's a philosophical conundrum for them that they never had a way of getting out of it. So we say no. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does do what is good for us, but we have to understand it in the broad wisdom. So we understand Allah's wisdom, that He gave you free choice. Necessarily, with free choice, you're going to have two possible outcomes. Necessarily, you will have the opportunity to go one way over another way. This is just the nature of how Allah created this world, because He wanted it to be. He said, I was a treasure, I wanted to be known. This is just the nature of God. He wanted this to happen in this way.
So they created fixed lines on things like justice, mercy, and kindness.
They were their usul were those things.
Red lines, and because of that, it became unstuck.
And it was big, and it was very problematic. But thank you for mentioning the al-Manzila bayn al-Manzilatayn story, because actually what they believe about it is not in this world. It's not about the next world, it's about this world. They believe, we're going to do it now, it's going to come about, the Khawarij, they believed if you committed a major sin, you become a kafir. Okay, the Mu'tazila, so they said that, and there's a reason, we have to get to it. We have to discuss Iman, what is the definition of faith, for us to appreciate the argument. But it was there that the Mu'tazila, so remind me to mention it there, it was there that the Mu'tazila said that if you do a major sin, you do not remain a Muslim. But you can't say that you're a total kafir either, simply because if you were to say that person was a total kafir, he's not a complete kafir and he's not a complete believer, but he's in between them. If he makes tawbah, then he re-enters into the fold of Islam, and if he doesn't do tawbah, then he dies as a kafir. So it was more about this world at that station, not necessarily the hereafter. They don't believe necessarily that there's a space in between paradise and hell where people are hanging about. But we'll talk about that when we get there. That's a bit of a misconception. Good, okay. وما هو الأصلح للعبد فليس ذلك بواجب على الله تعالى. This is not wajib over God, but it is wajib in the sense that God has written it for himself, to do it in his own majestic way, in his own wisdom. Then we get on to this point here. Interestingly, like I mentioned last week, if you were to study this in a traditional seminary, firstly, they probably wouldn't have taught this matan, they would teach it with its commentary of Imam Taftazani, and with its gloss by Imam al-Khayali. That's usually how they would teach it. When they get to this stage here, they would stop teaching the book, because they would say the rest is so easy that it's just information. It doesn't require a lot of conceptual effort. So we should be able to fly through this quite quickly now. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Because now it comes about, other things. The metaphysics is the bit that requires a little bit of effort in your mind. And inshallah, so we'll begin today. وَعَذَابُ الْقَبْرِ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So, have you got the text in front of you? Do you mind reading it, please?
The Arabic.
Yeah. So it gives me a chance to send a text message.
وعذاب القبر للكافرين والبعد وصاة المؤمنين وتنعيم أهل الطاعة في القبر وسؤال منكر ونكير ثابت بالدلائل السمعية.
جزاك الله خيرا.